r/malicious compliance, Karen the Sergeant. Story 1. This story took place at Fort Hood. Yes, the famous Fort Hood. It's now 2008, and I've been assigned to the armorer for our brigade's HHC unit. HHC stands for Headquarters and Headquarters Company, basically. It's the platoon that runs the regular day-to-day stuff such as troop management, ordering new supplies of various natures, and of course, equipment management. At least that's how I saw it. As an armorer, I basically look after the various weapons and sensitive equipment an Army unit might have. I'd been working at this unit for a few months and quickly acclimated. We had an awesome command team, amazing sergeants, and the troops were all pretty amazing at their duties. I was one of the only lower enlisted military police in the unit due to my arms room schooling. But in general, it was not that big of a deal to see a specialist in charge of a section quite literally worth a couple $100,000 to $1 million in equipment. It took me a while, but I had built up a decent standing with several of the higher-ups through a positive work ethic and my get-it-done mentality. Well, back then, I was a bit of a partier and was more or less welcomed with open arms. Now, I had a good couple of months there before she walked in, and for the sake of the story, I'll not refer to her by my special nickname. Instead, let's just simply call her Karen. You'll learn why in a bit. Now, Karen was originally from Brazil and spoke with a very strong accent, which was kind of endearing. She also had recently reclassed, meaning she was originally a forklift operator, but the promotion points for that military occupational specialties, MOS, were too high, so she transferred to supply. Initially, she came off as intelligent, yet friendly. I had even formed what I thought was a strong friendship at this point. Before she was promoted, we'd regularly hang out after hours, we'd go to lunch, get groceries, study for boards, and even have the occasional movie night. Throughout all of this, I had slowly developed a crush on her, but I'll admit she intimidated me professionally, and I believe she was way out of my league. Probably a good thing with what eventually happened. So after she routinely won several Soldier of the Month boards, winning over everyone in the process, she was sent to a promotion board. As usual, she wowed everyone with her knowledge. It was later announced that she won the board, and we went out to celebrate that night with dinner and clubbing. And a month or so later, she was promoted to sergeant and was made the non-commissioned officer in charge of our supply office. Basically, she was a manager. And initially, things were good. She didn't overstep her bounds and remained professional all around. Then she started sticking her feet in the pool. It started small, first getting on another soldier for not doing his best at physical training, PT. To be fair, the guy was known to weasel his way out of PT, so his sergeant didn't see an issue with Karen, making him run an extra mile. Also, the guy was a bit of a creeper to most of the females in and around our brigade, including Karen. I'm assuming she wanted some light payback. She then started abusing her authority. Anyone lower ranking than her, she'd speak with a condescending attitude, even going so far as to pepper her dictation with various insults. When soldiers outside of her office brought this up to their chains of command, they were initially ignored since she was fairly well-liked around our company, and they simply couldn't believe these rumors. Eventually, my buddy, JB, as well as another sergeant who I'll refer to as Uncle Sam, were brought in from my old line unit. Despite JB's misgivings from a previous saga, he was actually one of the single most competent supply clerks I've ever met. He really knew his stuff. Same with Uncle Sam, he was one of the best NBC guys, nuclear, biological, chemical, in the brigade as a whole. But with JB's reputation outside of those that knew him, he wasn't well thought of in a lot of remarks. Of course, Karen was aware of this and took full advantage. Every time JB would try to instruct her on how to do some important paperwork, Karen would just order him to do it. Her usual excuse was, because I'm the sergeant, that's why. So JB got stuck doing all of the dirty work and Karen got all of the credit. Of course, Karen got praised for her work ethic and professionalism outside of the HHC, but everyone slowly learned that Karen wasn't as up to snuff as she made herself out to be, yet her arrogance continued to grow. During all of this, Karen had formed a relationship with another female in the unit. She was the command sergeant major's driver, so for this story, I'll refer to her as Wheels. I don't have a problem with LGBT. I even experimented at one point, but being gay in the military was a huge no-no back then, and subject to separation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. Basically, don't ask, don't tell. Wheels had a lot of bad luck with relationships. I won't go into details and simply state she sure knew how to pick 'em. Her relationship with Karen was no different. Out in the open, they'd regularly flirt for all to see, even in front of senior leadership, but behind closed doors, they were super toxic for each other. Our company leadership was pretty lenient. We all knew who was with who, more or less, and everyone respected the don't ask, don't tell orders. More or less, if you could pull your weight without letting personal drama get involved, no one cared. Of course, Karen openly flaunted this. Her ego had begun to grow. Around this time, I'd become a regular target of hers. As I was the armorer, I technically fell under her, and after we had a disagreement over how she'd been treating people, she began to treat me rather harshly. I began to receive write-ups for the littlest of things. Examples include multiple write-ups for not shaving, usually right after I've had a 24-hour shift and no access to a razor, getting written up for having a dirty uniform after I'd been working under a truck for Motor Pool Monday, vehicle maintenance, being drunk on duty. This was a Saturday morning, but she tried to write it in such a way as to make it sound like we had official business going on. And those were just a few examples, and after a while, my counseling packet started to look like the leather-bound edition of War and Peace. Anytime anyone asked about me, my work ethic was slammed and I was made out to be lazy. Even sergeants who'd previously worked with me began to believe Karen's stories, but there were a few who had my back. It wasn't long before Karen began to overreach her limits, though. Uncle Sam began to feel her wrath as she began to try and badmouth him, but his seniority and reputation around the brigade as a whole kept him afloat. Eventually, it got so bad that he refused to work with her and filed a complaint with our first sergeant and commander. Our first sergeant, whom I dubbed the Shield, didn't want any fighting within his company and more or less told them to play nice. She then started butting heads with another NCO, our chaplain's assistant, who was a whole rank above her. The chaplain's assistant, who I'll refer to as the Paladin, had become a close friend of mine after I had started seeking counseling with him and our chaplain. He was originally an infantryman with 2 tours under his belt, and the chaplain was formerly Special Forces, believe it or not. Both of them were 2 of the calmest people I'd ever meet. But at the same time, they were the last 2 you'd want to mess with professionally and privately. They were 2 of my biggest supporters back then, outside of JB and Mamasaurus. The other 2 became a surrogate family to a lot of us, even bringing us home-cooked meals on occasion. During one of my sessions with the chaplain, Karen came barging into the main office. She began to demand the chaplain to release me so I could stop wasting her time. She and the Paladin began to have an increasingly loud dispute over this, which ended with the Paladin telling Karen she could either leave his office through the door or the window in the next 10 seconds. Karen ran off to the Shield to report the threat. The Paladin and chaplain each stated their side of the events, and Karen was verbally reprimanded. After the reprimanding, Karen counseled me for wasting her time and tried to bar me from the chaplain's office, but was again reprimanded. These were the first negative remarks Karen had ever received in her career up to this point, and they did not sit well with her. Now, this is the part where the malicious compliance came in. While collecting my keys one day, Karen asked to take a look at some of the paperwork. I really didn't think anything of it and opened my arms room up for business. When she returned the paperwork, I took a look at it and noticed that it was missing several important stamps. Upon further investigation, I found that her name had been added to all of the important paperwork. You see, when you work in an arms room, you need at the minimum several levels of security clearance as well as company orders and a bunch of other important paperwork. When I asked her about it, she said, "It's none of your business." She had forged government documents. When I further informed her of the trouble she could get into, I was further told, "You're not the NCO, I am. Now get back to work." So that's what I did. About a month and a half later, I was on leave and home in Washington State for my little brother's wedding. About 3 days into my leave, I received a text message from my then platoon sergeant, who I'll refer to as Big Sis, stating not to give Karen my PIN. I didn't think anything of it at first, but then I received a very angry call from Karen. It went roughly like this. Me. "Hello? Karen. Is that how you answer the phone when I call?" Me. "Sorry, Sergeant. How can I help you?" Karen. "I need the PIN code to the arms room." Me. "I can't give that to you. It's against federal regulations." Karen. "Then you need to come back ASAP." Me. "That's not going to happen either." Karen. "Then I'll have your rank." She then hung up on me. Having an idea of what happened, I called Big Sis and asked her what happened. Stifling a giggle, Big Sis told me she'd tell me when I get back and to enjoy my vacation. I proceeded to receive 3 more phone calls from Karen, each more threatening than the last. I returned 13 days after the call and got an earful from both Big Sis and the Paladin. Apparently, while I was on leave, the Shield wanted to get some serious weapons cleaning done and had Karen open up the arms room. Since she did not have a PIN for the alarm, the MPs were notified. They asked her for the paperwork and she provided the documentation she had rewritten. They quickly pointed out all of the issues I had pointed out almost 2 months earlier. She got reamed by the Shield and tried to pass the blame on me for not informing her of the issues. The Shield informed her that this was all on her. Despite the seriousness of all of this, she had only received negative counseling. This was her first official one. In her mind, it was all my fault. After I got back, she doubled down her efforts to ruin my career and what little reputation I had left, but she got what she deserved in the end.